appreciate everyone attending today and the opportunity to present this subject that's always timely. So for our agenda today, we're going to talk a little bit about what to do to be in a constant state of readiness for an FDA inspection. And then when the FDA does call to schedule the inspection, the steps that ought to be taken inside of the organization, the preparations that can be made, trainings that can be given, and the individuals that ought to be included in those kinds of training. And then when the FDA does show up at the door, what steps to take, and what about if they haven't scheduled the inspection, who to call, what to have ready for the inspection so that it goes smoothly, and we try to keep the FDA as impressed as we can with the organization and the state of readiness that we have. And then after the inspection, what would be next to take care of the logistics for going forward. And then, of course, we'll have a question and answer session. So, preparing for the inspection. Our mantra is the best way to survive an FDA inspection is to just really always be prepared for it. It's important that the organization have an existing FDA policy and procedure in place that people have been trained on, that they understand what to expect when there is that inspection that comes along on a regular type of basis. It's important to have the internal audit program in good shape. The internal audit program, of course, is very important to show to FDA that we are auditing ourselves, that we understand requirements, and that we take our quality system seriously and really intend to have our employees trained on quality aspects, quality policies, and that results of those internal audits are going up to management review so that we can show that we have a management team that is invested in and really a part of the monitoring of the quality system. So having that internal audit history is important to be able to show when the audits have been undertaken, and that it's a well-organized program. The audits are planned and undertaken at the planned times. Having previous external audits is always a good way to help prepare. So, of course, anybody that's in the medical device business is having customers coming in and auditing them on a regular basis. And then also performing supplier audits helps keep some of the information or the ideas in mind that we need to include in our own internal audit program. And then having mock FDA audits is always a very excellent way to keep in a state of readiness, to really help the employees in the organization understand what it would be like when the real FDA comes and audits. So it's really important to keep horizon items that you want to tackle for your organization, such as what are my quality objectives and my objectives? Do I need to revisit them and restate them? What planning efforts do I have in place to ensure that my quality system stays up to date and that my quality plans are real and viable? And then, do I have anything coming up that's really going to impact the quality system? Are there new regulations that are hitting the horizon? Are there changes in some of the quality system standards that are going to be coming along? and really understanding your suppliers and your supplier controls. As we know, FDA is really placing a lot of emphasis on these supplier controls. They're interested in making sure that companies have good, strong quality agreements in place, and so it becomes really important to keep the suppliers and the supplier chain up to speed with what the organization needs. So, of course, the purpose of FDA inspection is really to check our procedure against the practice, the things that we're actually doing, and so we can show that we say what we do. And then really taking a look at the actual practices. Are we doing what we say we will do? And then the old FDA mantra, if you didn't document it, you didn't do it. So really checking records against procedure. And it's still a fact that when I go out and look at organizations and the quality practices and the testing that they do on their products and so forth, there's times when things are just not documented. And so they'll say, well, we tested it and we know that it's good because we did this and that on it, and there's no documentation effect. And so it's very important that we know what our test engineers and quality engineers are doing for testing product, for testing procedures, for testing processes, and have those things documented so that we can show that we do have that state of readiness in the quality system. And then, of course, they're checking to see if the practice is effective and that we are turning out good quality product and whether we meet the quality system regulation requirements. So we can have really great procedures in place, but there may be some holes for the requirements in the actual regulations. So they need to take a look at that and make sure that those regulations are up to speed and in good order. So in short, it's really an open book test of the quality system. It is a sampling of a process or activity at a point in time, and so we must realize that we really can't take a look at every practice, every process, every procedure during any given audit. And that's why it's important to keep the audit process going and have those internal audits recurring on a regular basis, reviewing the results of them, monitoring to see whether we have recurring problems or whether we are finding new problems in areas that we hadn't looked at in the previous internal audits. And even, of course, if we've had an external or a mock FDA audit that we contracted for, realizing that that is, again, looking at a picture in time, and there still may be issues that those did not uncover. So again, it's the assessment of the system and the processes that make up that system and determining whether it's conforming to the applicable requirements and regulations. So what happens when we get that call from the FDA that says, we are going to be coming and visiting you? They of course, will work out a time that's feasible for their schedule more than ours. And so at that moment in time, it's a real opportunity for a reality check and really determining what is our current state, what do we need to do, what can we do in the time that we have before FDA will arrive. And we really want to look at it as an all-hands-on-deck opportunity. We want to make sure that all of our procedures on how to handle the audit are in place. So we have that how to handle an audit plan. We have identified who to pull together, which teams are going to be involved in the audit, and ensure that those teams understand what the roles and responsibilities that they will play in the audit. One place that sometimes is neglected is the receptionist. So it's really important that the receptionist understands what to look for when the FDA comes in, the credentials that they'll present, being at a state of readiness, giving that first good impression to the inspector that the company is organized, ready, prepared, so that the receptionist knows who to call, how to get someone there quickly to greet the FDA and to escort them. And then having the teams in place that will get the meeting rooms ready, have, of course, the opening meeting room available and ready to roll, and then understanding which rooms you're going to use for the inspection. There'll be a room that you'll want to have available for the FDA to use throughout the inspection, and then some back room, what we call a war room, ready for items to be prepared. And then really the importance of training the teams and the team members again as to what they can expect during the audit and the items that they should have ready in their areas. So go through and refresh everyone's mind on the quality system requirements and the quality policy. It's a really good idea to walk the manufacturing floor and make sure that there are no unnecessary or uncontrolled documents that are posted around being used in certain processes. Be careful that there's no informal posted reminders that employees are using on things that they use to perform their work. Sometimes you go around, and in spite of all of the best efforts, you'll find post-it notes that remind employees what their test parameters need to be, or what the test limits are, or something to that effect, rather than having their official procedure out and available. You want to make sure that none of that is sitting around. And then if the company uses charts or graphs to measure quality system, you want to make sure that those are up to date and correct. Because remember, the FDA is going to take a tour of the facility when they come, and they are going to be looking at materials like that and perhaps making note of areas that they want to come back and take a look at. So if those charts and graphs are out of date, it can lead them down a road that you really rather they didn't go down. Again, first impressions are so important. And so keeping work areas neat and clean is really a big help. It helps FDA understand that the company believes in quality, that they are organized, and that they have a good heads up on how to perform proper quality processes. Again, performing an internal and third-party mock audit. If there's time, you may want to take care of some of those activities again before FDA will arrive, just to see if there's some specific areas that perhaps a third party would be able to see easier than somebody that's in the midst of the forest. And then making sure that the processes that employees are doing and working from are updated, and that their work is properly recorded with the information of the employee which are performing those processes being recorded. So looking great to the FDA, preparing an org chart. that is available to give to the inspector during the opening meeting. Really having a short presentation ready to show off the company's quality system and quality beliefs is quite impressive. It doesn't take a long time to put such a presentation together, and it can really start the inspection off on a great foot. And then take the time to prepare a tour route and have your tour guide or guides plan so that they know where they're going to take FDA, what the procedures or processes are that the FDA might be the most interested in looking at during the tour. And just have all of that pre-planned is very excellent to take the surprise out of any areas that the FDA may want to take a look at. Again, reviewing the manufacturing facility, make sure it's clean and neat, that there aren't those sheets sitting around. And then training the people that will be involved in the inspection. So I understand that that can be difficult because there's times when we won't know exactly what all the FDA is going to be looking at, but having some experience with previous inspections, you'll at least know the teams that you'll want to pull together and get them trained. And don't forget the manufacturing department and have the employees ready there to talk to the inspector as they go through. Making sure that they can articulate what their process is, what they're doing, where they are in their procedure, and very important that they know what can go wrong with the product if they don't do their processes correctly. Go through the do's and don'ts checklist and set up that war room, that back room that will prepare the documents that the FDA requests and keep a record of those documents. So as we know, the inspection technique that FDA follows is from the Q-sit. That is always available on the FDA website to refresh our memories of what the inspectors are trained to. They, of course, have the 4 major subsystems that they are going to take a look at, starting with management as the hub in the center, and then moving to the corrective and preventive actions, which includes, of course, the complaint handling system and MDR and product tracking activities, and then perhaps design controls and production process controls. And as FDA teaches us, they will automatically move into the materials controls, document records and change controls, and the equipment and facility controls during auditing of those other subsystems. So they will be observing the activities of employees. They may interview employees from different processes. They'll take a look at the records that are created during the production of product, and they'll look at the documented procedures and requirements and just assess how they all fit together into the quality system and the regulations. So things to remember to do during the inspection, and these are important that we train the different teams before the FDA arrives, but make sure the inspector is escorted at all times. You want to be courteous to the FDA, but don't be overly talkative. Remember that one of the audit techniques is to try to get people talking on a friendly basis so that we can gather information about processes that we may not get otherwise. So it's important to really be friendly and courteous, but don't overly offer information. Be truthful about answers, and it's okay to say if you don't know an answer. um, and that you will get the response, or will find someone who can give the response. That's okay, but don't try to answer questions that you're not certain about. And understand what the FDA is entitled to and what they aren't entitled to. So quality records and documents they are entitled to take a look at. And be careful here, if you have confidential information that they are going to be looking at, you can identify it as confidential, but don't over-identify something as confidential, because if we tell FDA that everything is confidential, then they will decide that really nothing is, so your confidential information will have danger of getting into the wrong hands. Excuse me. And then management reviews, internal audit results, and financial records are not available for FDA. And the reason is that the FDA wants the company to be completely honest with themselves internally and not worry about whether the FDA is going to review those results and then use it against the company. So remember, if you give the FDA these records, then they're entitled to them. So you want to be sure that you have a way to show that your management reviews and your internal audits are occurring without giving the actual results of those operations to the FDA. Answer only what is asked. So if you don't understand the question, or if you're one of the FDA escorts and you see that an employee doesn't understand the question, it's okay to ask for clarification and make sure that the question is completely understood before it is answered. And then having that war room prepare the documents that FDA requests and making a record of each and everything that FDA looks at, so that you have your own record available of everything that the FDA used during the inspection on the facility. That can become very important later on. Things not to do during the inspection. Again, don't offer information, and that kind of speaks to the not getting overly talkative area. Inspectors know that people like to talk about the work that they do, and so if they can get them talking, they may be given information that will assist the inspector in their future inspection work. That you want to be careful that you just answer the questions and not give additional information. Don't refer to uncontrolled documents. So if FDA asks employees what they're doing and what their processes are, make sure that the employees understand that they should not be picking up documents that have not been issued by the document control position in the company, and that they're not the official version. You do not want to answer questions for others. Again, if you see that someone is not understanding a question, you can help get it clarified to them, but they need to be able to answer the question for themselves. And then don't air concerns about the processes. I've been in audits where it's been the belief of some of the employees that if they say to an inspector that they have a little bit of a concern about a certain process that they're working on, that things will get better for them. So you want to try to make sure that your employees are happy and that they will not talk to inspectors or auditors about those kinds of concerns. And then again, you do not offer gifts or lunches or gratuity to the FDA. They will not accept them, and you need to understand that they are not in a position to be able to. And then if you hear a question, you think you know the answer, be careful not to give suppositions. Make sure 100% that you know what the correct answer is. So with that, Walt, I will give it to you, and you can take it from here.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Walt Murray with Master Control, and have had the opportunity to be involved in many audits, especially those where the FDA in the past has made it somewhat of a habit to pop in. I think probably one of the things I would add to Linda's presentation at this point in the FDA scheme of things is that, of course, all may know that this is a risk-based world we live in now, and that the FDA, I'm sure, looks at many different audits in their venues to determine from a risk-based perspective whether it's wise to do so. And a good example would be to have an organization where they may be aware that parties are not available that would normally be available if the visit was planned, and that may be a critical consideration, especially if during the summertime people take vacations and they're not around. August may not be a good month to be doing pop-in inspections with a facility. So let's go to the ding-dong slide here. We have the arrival of an investigator, and this person has basically requested of your receptionist or whomever answers the door that they're here for this purpose. So the first thing is, where do you put this person? They've arrived. If you don't have a lobby or a place for them to gather to sit, what do you do with this person? So, of course, if you do have a lobby, you would have them sign in. If you don't have a sign-in document, be aware that the receptionist should probably make sure that there's something there. That's obviously a GMP requirement for many regulated facilities, so be sure that when the investigator shows up that they have to go through the appropriate sign-in procedures, which may even include video information regarding safety or written information regarding safety as part of that setup at the reception point. Also be aware that if you don't have a reception area, possibly a room, an empty room, or a room that's not used too often, that person can be taken to that room to await further interaction with your team. But more importantly, be sure that when that person is given a place to park, if it's not in the reception area, that an escort be immediately available to be sitting with that person, and of course avoid any casual conversation where necessary, but be available and be at that point with that person if they move beyond the reception desk to a room that may accommodate them. Now, all the things that Linda's talked about up to this point in preparation for this means that there is a point at which a war room or a back room in which people are going to start to move to be prepared for executing the audit, and the other room that's also should be set up is the room in which the auditor will live during the course of the day or the week or however long they are there. That makes sure that there is a room that can be basically converted, if you would, to a place where it is basically neutral. There's no documentation in the room that can be perused, and the option may be there to have a laptop, but make sure the laptop has a security capability and cannot be accessed without someone, the escort or someone, to do so, especially if you're going to use electronic records for perusal relative to organizers or whatever it is through your EDMS that you want to have the investigator review. Of course, when you now have the people in your organization have been notified either through cell phone, instant message, email, or maybe even walkie-talkie, if that's your preference, just be aware that you should have some form of communication. Then in your environment, this would be an equivalent of a code blue in a hospital, and that the importance of having people muster and be aware and available to perform the audit, that they know their duties and they're ready to go. The presentation then that is mentioned here, the open meeting presentation, there should be either an appropriate person from your quality regulatory group who is aware and ready to speak to the investigator. And to start off with a presentation is a great icebreaker with an investigator. So providing a short presentation of a half a dozen slides tops would be good. Make sure that those slides speak to the upbeat side of the organization. Remember that what we're talking about here in 99% of the cases that we're conveying GMP or good manufacturing practice readiness for these folks, unless there are some stipulative things that are specific to the presentation. But provide that presentation so that the organization can be given a positive light. Okay. I can't stress enough, of course, always having some form of an investigator available to the process, and to make sure that that escort is there from the get-go. That person should not have any other duties on their plate once this process has been instigated. Okay. The investigator, of course, will present credentials. Could be in the form of a badge or in the form of a calling card which has the investigator number on it. And that should be noted somewhere. It will probably be on the 482, which is a document that is used for mutual signature by the investigator and the authority within the organization who is allowed to sign that document and has been delegated that responsibility. It just simply says, okay, we're going to perform an audit, and we're here to do so, and so the 42 is consummated. The reception area should have some form of contact list relative to the people who are involved, at least this is not a document available to the investigator, but is a communication document more than anything else as to who's in the back room, who's going to be in with the investigator. Is there a backup escort or set of escorts? May the escorts be unique to the area in which they're going to provide where the person is going to go in terms of the tour. That's what I was looking for. So that if there are specific areas that are unique relative to being sensitive to, for instance, that you know the person who's the escort understands the gowning technique. If they're going to go into, say, a clean room environment or a GMP environment that may require hygienic types of gowning techniques. And of course, an usher to be a primary escort in general, on a general basis is good, but just be aware of the risk-based orientation relative to your environment, your working environment, and then the need for things like the GMP issue. The opening meeting, of course, will have its own room. That room will be, during the course of the day, the room in which the investigator will be asked to stay, unless with an escort outside of that room. And make sure that it is set up and arranged in a conducive way in terms of lighting, electricity, internet access if that is conducive and allowed, and of course the other room being that that back room or war room, and that it is operational not only from the standpoint of accessibility electronically to documentation, but if you're a paper-based organization, have some documents that should be more readily available, or at least have gone through, as Linda has mentioned, gone through looking at documentation to make sure that there, whatever means for that documentation to be available, that you've done so. For instance, do you have a hard copy of an org chart right there? Do you have a that maybe in the actually would be in the room for the initial review, but other documents on the heels of that that may be available to produce that you will use to anticipate review. And of course, mention the tour of the facility. If you're going to take the investigator around the facility, be aware and understand what the timing is and what's good timing for that. And unless the investigator insists on being out there right off the bat, you may want to look at the schedule and understand what might be the best time in the morning or the beginning of the day to provide that tour. And then I would, as a part of your mock audit, definitely do the tour physically and look at your operation from a tour perspective as to what they can see, where they might ask questions, who are the people that would be readily available for the investigator to queue up to have discussions with and have them prepared. Of course, there are different types of inspections relative to instigating such, and a pre-announced is pretty typical, more often the case than not. You may receive up to as much as 2 weeks advance notice or more in order to provide time to prepare for that. And typically, the scheduling risk issue is what concerns the investigator and having the appropriate people. Being aware that there are certain things that they know that the organization may perk up and have fine-tuned within that 2-week or whatever that window is. These are generally referred to as routine inspections. There probably will not be some risk-based orientation of concern related to the audit, okay, or to the investigation. Directed audits are unique and can be, and usually are, not announced. The reason for that, the first reason for that is the timing with regard to the investigation. I've been involved in several of these. The investigator has a very aggressive time schedule. Usually, as a result of this is when there is a recall condition or something in the field that has instigated the need to look back through the supply chain relative to the nature of the condition where the product has been deemed to be, in some way has broached the safety condition relative to the patient, person, or the environment in which it's been used. It's referred to as a for cause audit, meaning just that. The investigator's goal is to move back through the process until it understands the nature of where the focal point could be for compromise relative to the cause related to the issue that has instigated the directed audit. One thing I would caution here, though, is if you have an unannounced directed audit, sometimes it is possible the investigator will take some latitude to visit longer or wait, and that means that they may see or hear something that is a question to them relative to your quality systems, and that they would like to look around a little more. And that's very, very possible that they could do that. It could be something they see, something they hear, or maybe something they even may be aware of at your facility, and the for cause audit has finally given them an opportunity to come visit you. So be aware that a for cause, while typically pretty efficient, can can be broadened based on what the auditor or the investigator would like to see of your facility on the basis of need and interest on their part. As far as follow-up goes, of course, we should know that an investigator typically is the first phase or first step in the process. Follow up on your part relative to leaving any 483 with any findings has a specific time window for response, and that you should try to instigate documentation to prepare for that follow-up on the basis of that response as quickly as you can. Okay. Make sure that you know which of the responses or nature of the responses that are there on the basis of the findings. And of course, there's a website link there that you can use if necessary for your use. Logistics. Realize a little bit about what the investigator is going to do during your tour. I typically, when it's unannounced, I typically like to coach a couple of escorts to be sensitive to the nature of both the direction and viewing of the investigator or curiosity of the investigator, and then also the other escort to make notes relative to the type of information the investigator is conveying in the form of questions, comments, curiosities, and of course a lot of this would be where they're looking that the employee or employees of the organization are versed relative to the responses. So there's a preparation there through the mock audit. Mock audits, by the way, are continual improvement processes that are closed loop. That meaning that they should be used if you have a mock audit and you have some sense for your ability to grade that audit. And if I have a mock audit that's a miserable failure, worst case scenario, I should not waste any time at all for making sure the training, the discussions, the competency is corrected as quickly as possible and improved, and then on the heels of that have another immediate mock audit. So this should be a very risk-based approach in terms of looking at how effective the mock audit is, and that you had provided criteria on how to gauge the effectiveness of a mock audit in a formal way with some documentation, not only to the issues that come up during the audit to be improved, but also the audit itself in terms of the mock audit and how things went relative to things like response to the mock auditor, questions answered, not answered, areas where they went down because something was done that should not have been done relative to the escort and the route, or something that the auditor may have seen or was queuing in on that you want to be aware of and understand why. These are all things from a documentation standpoint you need to capture during the mock audit. Be prepared with the event log that you have, or event logs that you have, that give some semblance of how events are handled. Typically, these logs should have fairly reasonable aging conditions relative to the events, especially if you can keep the majority of them to a correction level condition and close them with justification. And of course, look at a track and trending mechanism if necessary, in order to satisfy an event as, you know, we've looked at it. We're not at this point necessary. It's necessary to address that, but to track and trend it as an example. And then, of course, CAPAs should have the appropriate steps relative to the cause, verification, the action, validation, and the implementation components for leading to effectiveness. And understand that one of the ways that an investigator that's on their queue, they may not be able to look at internal audits or review actions relative to management, but where they can go is to look at your catalog. So be aware that they may on the backside come in and look for issues that may basically open the can of worms on things that you need to be prepared for by looking through a catalog, and also the training aspect of your business as well. Okay. So at the end of the day, it would be appropriate to have the investigator go back to the original room in which they were introduced, have a summary for that day, try to promote that conversation, the appropriate person promote that conversation at the end of the day in the form of a summary. And of course, if there is anything that comes up relative to that meeting, then right after, immediately investigate the possibility of correction relative to those findings. Now, a lot of times an investigator will say, I understand that you have corrected this. I will still need to carry it through as a finding in my 483, but at least that information will carry with the 483 as part of that process as the investigator submits that over to the compliance side of the organization. Okay. And then when immediately after the investigator leaves the facility, hold a debriefing of the team or the nature of folks who need to be there, and ask the question, so how did we do? How did it go? And cover those areas. Again, don't make it casual, make it quantitative, and have some form of documentation where areas are checked off. You can use a routing sheet to show specifically at points in the process where they're moving around. Use attribute cues on that document to show that they looked in this direction from this point, they saw this, they saw that, they asked it at this point in the shop is where they asked this question. That's all very good attribute information for looking at the nature of how the investigation proceeded. So if the investigator doesn't really provide daily recaps, at least from the standpoint of being fresh in what's going on, make sure that there's some way in order to have them internally by queue. So have that quality person or regulatory person try to provide some means to instigate a discussion with the auditor or the investigator around those kind of things. And then one of the things that should happen as a result of the how we do component of the day after the investigator leaves is to then start planning for what the next visit will have in terms of plan analysis for risk-based issues, whether it be the next day or whenever the investigator determines they'll need to return if they do. If there are going to be findings, okay, again, try to see what you can do during the course of the day to fix these before the investigator leaves, that the fixes may be noted, because, again, as far as how the FDA functions, the investigator is the front person relative to what the eyes see and the ears hear, etc. It then goes into a vacuum with a compliance officer for peer review of the notes from the investigator. So if you have those things in there, it just provides a positive, potential positive light relative to that additional information. So some points to ponder. Understand differences between technique with regard to the nature of the investigation that may occur. And of course, if it's the FDA, it's always going to have a product risk orientation relative to biocompatibility, exposure of product to dirt or to debris or something that may not be aseptic under GMP conditions. Make sure that for the FDA purposes that's important. understand the hierarchy in the way that their scheme worked relative to how they looked at your process. One of the pop-up or pop-in investigations I was involved in, the operator spent the whole day on investigating nothing but batch records for the whole first day of the investigation. And of course, a batch record is a great way to look at a 360-degree sense of how the organization is organized in terms of documentation, as the batch record pushes everything back from supplier management to testing management to document management and even training. Okay. The investigator, of course, as I mentioned, doesn't have final say. The document from the investigator will go to the compliance organization internally with the FDA for review, and then, of course, if there's any escalation or conditions as a result of that, your EIR will reflect that condition and what may be in store for you as a result of that investigation. This document is for your reference. As I know, these slides will be available, and then you can review relative to what a notified body will look at versus the FDA investigator. The notified body is looking for systems and process improvement. The investigator is looking for product safety kinds of things, and so be aware of your orientation relative to those two possibilities in terms of the nature of the investigation. Of course, here we have the famous QSIT diagram that allows you to understand the scheme relative to how an investigator will look at things inside the QSIT, or Quality Systems Inspection Technique handbook that they use. And while this document is oriented primarily towards medical device, there could also be conditions where they use this to look outside of medical device relative to other GMP-related issues if you have a combo product or if you have any other single-use products that are not necessarily device-oriented. So in your closing meeting, make sure that the auditor will give a list of those findings, what the nature of the finding is. Is it going to be at the level of an observation, or is it going to be a finding with potential escalated risk considerations for concern that it may be a major, or maybe something you just need to get your arms around as a minor, or rather, if there's a critical, get some sense for that. Okay. If corrections have been made, ask the investigator to note it in the finding, and so they may take it with them. And of course, make sure the investigator will discuss response requirements in their mind as to what they see to be the nature of those responses. That helps you to prepare for providing a response and being on the same page with the investigator. Okay, and then of course be sure that the investigator checks out of the facility and that formally at that point the investigation has concluded. So as a result of the investigation, then of course next steps mean a response. If it's necessary for a 43, that would be a 15-day window. And then of course you can also approximate within roughly a 30-day time frame to request the report relative to the activities in the investigation, and any other further discussion you may feel might be necessary relative to findings and your response with regard to the division or local office under which you are have begun the investigation. So that concludes my part of this presentation. I have one other comment that I would like to make in my notes. One is that be aware when an auditor is going to ask an open or a closed question, and what does that mean? If they ask you things like, is this or does that, you're in a yes-no situation. or a one-word answer versus an open-ended question where they ask why or what do you mean by. Be sensitive to that. That helps you not to get the auditor upset because you know that the nature of the question is answered appropriately. Okay. Don't spill the beans, as Nancy has mentioned. Linda has mentioned at this point. Be sure that you understand the nature of the use of your information from electronic versus, say, paper-based or a hybrid system. Be aware of what that means in terms of availability for documentation to the investigator. And just be aware in general that these investigations are risk-based. So the best way for you to be prepared is to look at your mock audit or your preparation as a risk-based preparation, and you should be pretty successful on being prepared at that point to host an investigator. So thank you very much. I've concluded my presentation piece at this point, and we'll turn it back over to our moderator.